The night it happened, everything seemed normal inside Craven County Jail. The lights were dimmed, the halls were quiet, and most of the guards were operating on autopilot. It was the kind of ordinary evening that gave inmates like John Matthew Nigh exactly what they needed, a false sense of peace, a perfect cover for something extraordinary. John wasn't pacing in his cell like the others. He wasn't chatting, laughing, or even resting. He was focused, calm, and deadly silent. At 37 years old, John Matthew Nigh wasn't new to prison life. He'd done time before, for crimes ranging from drug charges to assault, but nothing as serious as now. He was facing a long stretch, and he wasn't about to sit back and serve it. He had been preparing for weeks. It all started with a single observation, a thin metal grate above his cell door, a standard part of the ventilation system. Harmless, it seemed. But John saw what others didn't. He saw a possible exit. Every night for the past 2 weeks, he stared at that vent, timing the guards' footsteps, memorizing their schedules, and mapping out the possibilities in his head. He knew that beyond that vent was a narrow duct, part of the aging HVAC system that ran through the jail. It wasn't designed to hold a grown man's weight, but it also hadn't been properly maintained in years. It was a risk, a high one, but it was the only way. He started working in silence. First, he needed tools, but in jail, tools don't come easy. He began by dismantling pieces of his bunk, breaking down parts of the metal frame into sharp, flat-edged strips. He turned a toothbrush into a makeshift screwdriver. Over several days, he began to loosen the screws holding the vent in place, just 1 or 2 each night. Not enough to draw suspicion, but enough to make progress. To cover his tracks, he replaced each screw at the end of the night, tight enough to look secure, loose enough to come off quickly. No one noticed. The night before the escape, John sat on the edge of his bunk, heart racing. This was it, one shot. If he failed, there would be no second chance. He didn't eat dinner, he needed his body light, nimble. At exactly 11:45 p.m., just after the final head count, John got to work. He waited 10 minutes for the last guard to pass by. Then he moved. He climbed silently onto the sink in his cell and reached up. The vent cover came off in seconds. He carefully placed it on the floor. Then he looked up into the darkness. The duct was about 18 inches wide, barely enough for him to squeeze through. The walls were covered in thick dust, the air inside hot and stale. But it was a tunnel, and it led out. He hoisted himself up and began to crawl. The metal groaned beneath him, a reminder that any sudden movement could give him away. He moved inch by inch, pressing his body flat, ignoring the sharp corners that scraped his skin. Behind him, the jail carried on in silence. Ahead of him, freedom waited. It took nearly 30 minutes to crawl from his cell duct to the central ventilation hub. There, the ducts branched in multiple directions, some leading to other wings of the jail, others leading outside. John knew which one to take. He had counted the turns and sketched the blueprints in his mind. He turned left, then right, then straight ahead. That's when he reached the junction above the laundry room. Below him, through a vent, he could see the rows of machines and empty carts. The room was unmonitored at night, and more importantly, it had a door that led directly outside, used for laundry pickup. That was his target. But first, he had to drop into the room. He found another grate, this one older, rusted, and easier to bend. Using his makeshift tool, he pried it loose, then carefully swung his legs down into the room. He lowered himself as quietly as he could, then dropped the last few feet, landing on the hard tile floor with a muffled thud. No alarms. He moved fast. The laundry room door had a keypad lock, but John had a trick. He'd noticed months ago that the door was often left slightly ajar during night shifts, laziness from staff who didn't want to key in the code every time. He held his breath and pushed. Click. It opened. Outside, the night was damp, the air thick with the scent of pine trees and dew. Beyond the jail perimeter stood a fence, tall, topped with razor wire. John ran. There was no cover, no shadows to hide in, just open space and hope. As he approached the fence, he pulled a tightly wound sheet from his waist. He'd hidden it under his clothes, fashioned it into a makeshift rope with knots every foot. At the end was a small metal hook, twisted from a bunk spring. He tossed it up. Once, twice. The third time, it caught. He climbed. The wire cut his hands. The sheet burned against his skin, but he kept going. At the top, he rolled over the razor wire, careful not to get snagged. Then he was over. He dropped into the field beyond the fence and ran into the woods. Inside the jail, everything was still normal. The guards didn't discover he was missing until the morning head count nearly 6 hours later. By then, John Matthew Nigh was gone. The manhunt started immediately. Local police, highway patrol, US Marshals all alerted. Helicopters, K9 units, thermal imaging drones all deployed. But John had planned this part too. He had studied escape stories for years, how inmates were caught because they stayed close, asked for help, or used cell phones. He didn't do any of that. He disappeared into the Carolina forest, traveling by night, resting by day. He stole clothes from back porches, food from unlocked sheds. He drank from streams, changed his direction every few hours, covered his tracks. For days there were no leads. People were terrified. The media ran the story non-stop. Inmate escapes through jail ventilation. Photos of his face splashed across every screen. The warden was forced to give a press conference admitting that the jail had security flaws. Behind the scenes, heads rolled. Staff were disciplined. Doors and vents were reinforced. Protocols changed, but John was still out there. On the 7th day, the break came. A woman reported seeing a man sleeping under her porch. She thought it was her neighbor until she saw the news. When police arrived, the man was gone, but his footprints were fresh in the mud. 2 days later, a deputy spotted someone matching John's description walking down a dirt road. The man tried to run but was tackled and handcuffed after a short chase. It was over. John Matthew Nigh had been free for 9 days. Back in custody, he was silent during questioning. He didn't talk about the escape, didn't name accomplices, because there weren't any. He had done it alone. They transferred him immediately to a maximum security facility. Craven County Jail began sealing every vent, installing motion sensors, and adding cameras to every hallway. But the story stayed alive. Inmates whispered it like folklore. A man who crawled through the walls, vanished into the forest, and evaded one of the biggest manhunts in state history. To some, he was a criminal. To others, a genius. But everyone agreed on one thing. What he pulled off was real. And for those 9 days, John Matthew Nigh did the unthinkable. He proved that no matter how tight the cage, there's always someone out there willing to find the cracks.